Welcome to our Divine Principles Seminar. Newsflash, everyone. Newsflash. Everyone is looking for happiness. Everyone is looking for happiness. Beyond question. Even this guy. He's looking for happiness too. Look, la 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 la. Some think happiness is eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Some think that blowing yourself up will give you 72 virgins and streets of gold. Some think lots of drugs will do it, and others think rooms full of money will make them happy. But inevitably, what happens with eat, drink, and be merry, estrangement, alienation, disease, unwanted pregnancy, abortion, broken hearts, broken families, broken everything. It breaks society. The family breaking down breaks down society. Well, 72 virgins and streets of gold? Nah, basically gets you this, actually. Here's where you end up, and a ticket straight to hell. Drugs. This lovely young lady was arrested in January 2008 in Multnomah County, I think that's in Colorado. And about 8 months later, she ends up in the same place. The poor thing is a meth head. Wrecked, completely wrecked. Rooms full of money. Yeah, well, that's Ariano Felix cartel money. Extradited, arrested, deceased, arrested. These two guys, one of them's dead, one of them's arrested. That's where that leads. Drug dealing. Wow. You know, when you think of all the situations you could be in, that's one of the last. I've often thought I have strange people in my ancestry that were in the mob in Italy years and years ago, generations ago, and I often wonder how terrible it must be to be born into something like that you can't get out of. You don't leave that kind of thing alive. It's a really terrible, terrible life. So we know the state of the world today: confusion, despair, poverty, war, anger, selfishness, greed, intolerance. You can add to that list ad infinitum. And go ahead. You can add to that list infinitely, of course. The church has been traditionally where society goes generally. And in the old days, that was the case. The church was the spiritual fountain and the spiritual solace for the population. But even the church is struggling on a lot of different levels at this. Plato said, if we are always content with the everyday things that we see and hear, we'll never arrive at true knowledge. Jesus said in John 16:12, I have yet many things to say unto you, but you cannot bear them now. Howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth, for he will not speak of himself, but whatsoever he hears, he will speak and will show you the things that are to come. Jesus is promising 2,000 years ago that something more is coming. There's no way around this. This is a promise. This is a pledge from Jesus. These things have I spoken to you in Proverbs, same chapter, different verse. But the time comes when I shall no more speak to you in Proverbs, but I shall show you plainly of the Father. So this is 2,000 years ago. Jesus is promising something else is coming. So what is the way to true happiness? We need a deeper understanding of truth, clearly. Number one, an idea which explains the essential nature of God and the purpose of life. A spiritually unifying ideology. The world is ripped apart, and many times on religious lines, along religious lines. In Ireland, Catholics and Protestants for the longest time were throwing bombs at each other. Jews and Muslims in the Middle East. Thousands of year old conflict, really a religious conflict. And an idea that incorporates modern technology and scientific advances, and that's one real strength of the divine principle, is the incorporation of modern technology. And with modern technology, you would think, atheists will tell you, well, science and technology helps us to not believe in God. It explains God away. But it doesn't. Can you turn off that mic? So our teaching is called the divine principle. It comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition. And it's divided principally into three parts: the principle of creation, the nature of God, the purpose of life. Today we're going to discuss the nature of God and the purpose of life. The fall of man, the cause of evil. You ask 1,000 people what's wrong with the world, you'll get 1,000 different answers every time. The fall of man, for me, I've studied most of the major religions on earth. The fall of man, for me, really answered that question to my satisfaction. And the history of restoration, God's work through history. God's work through history. We see from the principle that history is not a series of disconnected events, but actually follows a course. So today we'll deal with the principle of creation. I think, just turn down the echo. The one question everybody has to answer for themselves is there a God? This is not a question that's optional. If there is indeed a God in the universe, we have to answer that question for ourselves. Because it's not something that can be put on the shelf like, well, I don't have to think about that. If there's a God, it's the most quintessential cosmic question you can ever ask yourself. And you have to answer it one way or the other, right? So Einstein was famously conflicted about the existence of God, and both sides, belief and unbelief, use his quotes to justify their own positions, because he was very, very conflicted on this thing. And he said, I want to know God's thoughts. All the rest are details. I don't think that's conflict, if you ask me. That doesn't sound like conflict to me. I don't think he was conflicted. But he said a lot of things that seemed contradictory. I think he was terribly conflicted about the idea. But he wanted desperately to entertain the idea that there might be a supernatural intelligence. He also said, science without religion is crippled, and religion without science is blind. This is Einstein, the preeminent intellect of the 20th century. He also said, the cosmic religious experience is the strongest and noblest driving force behind scientific research. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he was thinking about Isaac Newton when he was saying that. Isaac Newton was the discoverer of calculus, gravity, the first reflecting telescope. He said the famous quote, to every action there is always an opposite and equal reaction. The story goes that he was sitting underneath an apple tree. The apple hit him in the head. He discovered gravity. But he said, even today, we talk about Newtonian principles. And he said, this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, comets, could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent being. All variety of created objects which represent order and life in the universe could happen only by the willful reasoning of its original creator, whom I call the Lord God. People like to say that religious people are just easily led dupes. I beg to differ. I think Isaac Newton begs to differ, and Albert Einstein begs to differ. Max Planck, the father of quantum theory, received the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1918. And in 1944, after a lifetime in the electron microscope, said, as a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, to the study of matter, I can tell you, as a result of my research about atoms, this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. This mind is the matrix of all matter. I argue with atheists all the time online. Oh, he was just an old Christian crank. No, this is a guy who spent his entire life in an electron microscope. And this was the only conclusion. The cul-de-sac he went to was this. I throw up my hands. There's nothing I can do. There's an invisible force in the universe, whether you like it or not. That was a speech he gave in Austria in 1944, after receiving that prize many years before. He continued his research, and that was his conclusion. Antony Flew. For the last half century, the world's most famous atheist was Antony Flew. Long before Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and the rest of them, Flew was the preeminent spokesman for unbelief, but before his death in 2010, he became the world's most famous convert to belief in God. What turned his world right side up? His conversion to belief was an absolute earthquake in the atheist community. It just broke the ground. Boom. It split the atheist community in half. It's amazing. What happened to him? He met this guy. Dr. Gerald Schroeder earned his Master of Science and double PhD in nuclear physics and earth and planetary sciences at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Easily led dupe? I think not. He wrote this book, The Science of God. In a discussion with Antony Flew on the complexity of DNA, that is why Antony Flew became a believer. He said, this is impossible. DNA cannot be random. It's impossible. It's too complicated. It's too amazing. And he said finally, before he died, I must say that the journey of to the discovery of the divine has thus far been a pilgrimage of reason. I have followed the argument where it has led me. And that's the same thing that happened to me. I used to be a staunch atheist years ago. Bangladesh, swollen babies, starving, death, war. Where's God in all this? But I followed the argument where it has led. I read a couple of books. I talked to some people. I read one book, changed my life, Lift Up Your Heart by Fulton Sheen. He was the Archbishop of New York years ago. And he explained the existence of God. I was in a therapeutic community, a Gestalt therapy community. And he explained, for the first time, I had the existence of God explained psychologically. The id, the ego, the superego. He explained in so many terms that God exists outside of the id, the ego, and the superego. He's not readily cognizable. You can't quantify God. He's not blue. He's not square. He's not round. He's not tall. He's not... I could receive that. Based on that alone, I could no longer justify atheism because I didn't know. If I don't know, I can't categorically deny something that I can't disprove. That's my argument with atheists. It's like, how can you be an atheist? How can you say something does not exist when you have no proof? The burden is not on one making the claim in the case of God. Everything else, yes. If the moon is made of cheese, you better prove that. But we're talking about an invisible intelligence in the universe. That's something that's not quantifiable. The only intellectually honest place to be, if anything, is agnosticism that says, I don't know for sure. I can respect that all day long. If you say, I don't know. I moved from it doesn't work, it can't be, to I don't know. I'm not sure. And then from there, I moved to the baptism of the Holy Spirit and belief. And eventually, 7 years later, I came to Unification Church. It was a natural progression. That's a progression up, as far as I'm concerned. That was a clear progression up. Because the divine principle was the most incredible thing I have ever heard in my entire life. I heard it over a weekend, and that was 40 years ago. I never turned back. So, let's put some legs under this. Now, we talked about the divine principle, and this new teaching needs to incorporate modern technology. Well, we can do that now. Modern technology, rather than disproving God, it drives us right to God. It creates a cul-de-sac that you cannot get out of. The existence of God is a laboratory provable fact. So, we want to know about an artist. If we want to know about, let's say, Michelangelo, where do we go? We look at his work, the Pietà. And while I was practicing this morning, I was inspired, I hope by God, to bring this little item out. I got this in Rome in 1975. This was blessed by Pope Paul VI. I bought that for my mother. She was a very, very strong and dedicated Catholic. And but you can tell so much from this. Have anybody else seen this? I've seen this live. It's stunning. I cried in front of the thing. I didn't know what to do. Oops, sorry, I just hit my mic. I just couldn't believe it. But this this, not just the statue itself, it tells you something about Michelangelo, the internal character of Michelangelo. What must have been going on in his mind, in his heart, in his spirit, in his soul? He must have felt every single chip. Imagine that. I think he worked on this for 7 years.
The only piece of art was his name.
He signed this one,
Yeah.
understandably. But even though this is an external piece of marble that's been fashioned, it tells you about the artist. Number one, he had some kind of religious bearing. He understood the Bible. He understood the passion of the Christ, in a sense, right? So that's one way we can know about an artist's mind or an artist's invisible character by the things he creates. The Sistine Chapel. Absolutely unbelievable. Again, 7 years just to do the top. On his back, paint going in his eyes, fighting with the Pope for 7 solid years. So, like Newton said, every effect has a cause. My brain says, put your arm out. Out it goes. Cause, effect. It's basic Newtonian principle. That fan does not turn until the switch is put on. Most causes are invisible. That was an invisible order from the mind to the hand to go out. Invisible cause, invisible result. Same thing. If we want to know the creator, if there is a creator, there has to be a way to detect why the creator is the creator and who the creator is. The Bible starts right out in Genesis 1:27 with a very interesting quote that I think is really, I know as a Christian of many years, I never got this. Male and female, okay, big deal, so what? God created man in his own image, and the image of God created him. Male and female created he them. It makes it like reiterates the point. God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. It's like, are you guys getting this? I'm going to repeat it twice. God created man in his own image. In the image of God created him. Male and female, do you read over? Click. Wilco out. Created he them. Plural. More than one. God is not just an angry old man throwing lightning bolts down from Olympus. All right? Okay, well, we've got a beginning now. We have a beginning to the nature of God. Okay. Well, how does that manifest then? How does that manifest in the creation? Well, mankind, we have men and women. There's your first obvious manifestation of that dual nature. Animals, male and female, yeah. Plants, stamen and pistil. Molecules, cation and anion. The classic mixture of atoms is 2 atoms of hydrogen, 1 atom of oxygen gives you water, agua. That's right. In the interaction between cation and anion, stamen and pistil, male and female, reproduction happens, life, action, and multiplication. Molecules are made of atoms. Atoms have a proton and an electron. Atoms are made of particles, which have a positive, negative valence, and particles are made of energy. And energy is invisible. And this is just a little slide. This is not laboratory science. I'm not getting in a microscope or an electron microscope. This is just clearly observable reality. This is scientific reality. At the base of all creation is an energetic, invisible source. There's no getting around this. You can't philosophize this away. And that's why we say we need a new understanding incorporating 20th and 21st century science. Energy is invisible. Now, this lecture is a very, very compressed version. This is trying to keep it short and sweet as possible. But these lectures, the divine principle can be taught in 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 7 days, 21 days, and 40 days, if you really want to get into it. So we're doing flyover today, all right? Romans 1:20, even Paul understood this. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even as eternal power and Godhead, so they're without excuse. Even Paul got this. Paul was a Pharisee. He knew the Torah backwards and forwards. And he knew Genesis 1:27, male and female, yeah. He had that down. One of the problems is In the Bible, it's an extremely heavily masculine-dominated document. All right? All the kings were men except for one. All the judges were men, I think, except for one. Jesus was a man who never married. Paul was a man who never married. All the disciples were men. Jesus referred to God as his father. So there's a very heavily masculine-dominated tone to the Bible. I've had discussions with Christians about the nature of God. What do you think about this male-female thing? Doesn't it make sense that God would incorporate masculinity and femininity? They can't get it. Many of them cannot put this together. But Jesus called God his father. But the Bible starts right out with masculine and feminine, and the entire universe displays that. That fan goes around because of positive and negative interaction. So four-position foundation. So how does this happen? In that interchange between subject and object, how does that happen? God, the origin, this is called the four-position foundation, triple objective purpose. God is the origin of original masculinity, femininity, positivity, negativity. That's not good and bad. It's positivity, negativity, like a charge, right? God divides those two natures into subject and object parts, masculine and feminine, male, female, proton, electron, etc., etc., etc. Through the forces of give and take action, division, they reunite into whatever. You have a masculine something, feminine something, a dog, a cat, a bird, a human, whatever. This is how God creates. And the essential power of the universe, what drives the universe, what drives God, is the heart of God. That's the nuclear generator of the universe, is the essential heart of God. The intellect, emotion, and will of God are the quintessential engine that drives the universe. This is an interesting little tidbit here, spherical dimension of existence in 3D. If you close one eye, you see everything one-dimensionally. It's very hard to tell how far things are in front of you. You open your second eye, then you have depth perception. All of a sudden, everything comes into 3 dimensions. Why is that? Why isn't everything just flat? Just like a piece of paper. Everything's just flat, one-dimensional. Because atoms are going in spherical motion. At the subatomic level, everything is in orbit. Our Earth is in orbit around the sun. Our solar system is in orbit around something else. There are stars and galaxies all around there. Everything is orbiting around each other in an elliptical or round orbit by virtue of centrifugal and centripetal force and gravity, right? So the entire universe, from the subatomic level all the way up, is in circular motion. That's why everything is in 3 dimensions. Height, depth, width. Just a little tidbit. So the Creator is a harmonized being of original positivity, negativity, masculinity, femininity, internal character, intellect, emotion, and will, and external form. There's another chart we have. I decided not to include it, but I'm just going to tell you this. God is an internal character, intellect, emotion, will, or heart. Again, the engine that drives the universe is the heart of God. That's what we all have to find as humans. That's the challenge of life. Not just finding existence, but finding the heart of God. That's the challenge. So, how does that heart manifest? Well, one way, on the earth, we have, this is just one little snapshot of a local store of the things that are available in the vegetable world, right? The fruit world, spices, a fraction of the spices on earth, right? And we've got flowers. This is the Carlsbad flower gardens. Flowers, as far as the eye can see, thousands of varieties and species of flowers, and more water than we know what to do with, right? The earth moves at 67,000 miles an hour. If you can get your mind around this, this shows you the intellect of God. How God can create something as delicate as a fruit or a vegetable. At the same time, planets. Our Earth is moving at 67,000 miles an hour around the sun. And our year is 365 days. It takes that long to complete the trip. 93 million miles one way, all the way around is 186 million miles. At 67,000 miles an hour, it takes a year to complete the trip. And the Earth itself is rotating at 1,000 miles an hour. The International Space Station orbits at 17,000 miles an hour, 205 miles above the Earth. I mean, these are numbers that are just incomprehensible. Has anybody ever gone 100 miles an hour before? I have, you bad boys. It's a guy thing. You know how hair-raising that is. You can't even get your...
Everybody who's flown on a jet has gone 500 miles an hour.
Exactly, but you don't have any sensation of it, right? You have no sensation of it. Imagine all that, 67,000 miles an hour and rotating at 1,000 miles an hour, and you don't feel a thing. You're not flinging off the Earth. On Jupiter, just to walk across the room, you'd be like, really, like that. The gravity is so intense. On the Earth, people can jump. What's the high jump record? Anybody know? No, come on, it's got to be more. High jump is like 13, isn't it?
No, high jump is...
Oh, high jump. I'm talking pole vault. I'm thinking pole vault. Yeah, it's really, I mean, you can do amazing things, and it's very comfortable. But you're moving 67,000 miles an hour and rotating at 1,000 miles an hour. It's unbelievable how God has allowed us to be so comfortable on this planet. And in the middle, oh, I don't have my thing plugged in. I got a little sound effect. In the middle of all that complexity, we have the tree climbing goats of Morocco. Kill it. Pull the volume down. God is capable of such incredible complexity and amazingness, shall we say. But God has the time to do something like this. The tree climbing goats of Morocco. These guys love these little leaves so much, they're willing to risk their lives to get them. And all of us find this hysterically funny. Nothing else in creation finds this hysterically funny except us. This shows you again another aspect of God's character. God must have humor. God must have humor. If we have humor and we're resultant beings of God, then God must have humor as well. And God finds this hysterically funny, and we do too. How can you account for the eye of Madagascar? This guy doesn't make any sense. He's just ridiculous looking. But he's so funny looking. Don't you want to just someone's holding him in her hand. Just makes you want to pet his little head and console him for looking like that. So, scientists are all excited about the possibility of life on Mars. Oh my goodness, after studying rare minerals here on Earth, Dr. Stephen Ruff and Jack Farmer from Arizona State University have suggested that unusual deposits on the Martian surface could have been created by microbes. A theory which, if true, could be one of the most significant in scientific history. I think they found life on Mars. Oh, wait a minute, no, I'm sorry, disregard that. So, on Mars, they found things that might look like life. Oh, goody, goody, goody. When on Earth, we don't know what to do with our bounty. The trees give us oxygen. We give them a poison. They give us oxygen back. We give them a poison. They give us life. And even with cars running back and forth, planes crisscrossing the sky, burning up the oxygen, they still produce. There's a symbiosis, this incredible symbiosis between man and creation that keeps man alive. We have all of this. They're scratching for a microbe on Mars. And here we don't know what to do with ourselves. We can drop seeds in the ground and boom, make an orchard. Out of one apple, you can make an orchard and start a business. Unbelievable. Boom, boom. What do we do with all this abundance? Oh my goodness. And they're scratching for microbes on Mars. And there's actually a scientific study now going on Mars One. Go to mars1.com. They want to send a manned crew to Mars. 200,000 people signed up. It's a one-way trip. You don't come back. You have to go knowing that you're not coming back. 200,000 people signed up. Unbelievable. People as young as 18 years old. That's not thinking straight. It's going to be really interesting for about a month, and then, oh no, is there a gun? So, let's see what we have here. So, you are no match for my powers of cuteness. So God can make worlds. There are suns. Our sun is 800,000 miles across. The surface is 11,000 degrees. There are suns in the solar system that are 800 times bigger than that. Antares alone is bigger than that. 800 times bigger than that. It's impossible. The diameter of the sun is 4 times the distance from here to the moon. We can't get our mind around these numbers. I certainly can't. So God can do that and then can come down and make something like this. We find this hysterically funny and cute and endearing. To other animals, this is lunch. Certain animals, this is lunch, right? To us, this is endearing. We give it a name. We make a little home for it. We buy it food. We pet it. We cuddle with it. So, I like to, when I'm talking with atheists online, I try to divorce the entire religious argument from the discussion because they can't, it's impossible for them to hear it because they always revert back to the history of religion, which is dark. It's divided. It's violent. It's horrifying on every level. The history of religion is really bad. We can't defend it. There's no way to defend it. But I say divorce that from your argument. Pretend like religion never existed. Let's talk about a scientific principle. We've already seen the existence of God is actually settled science. It's settled science. I always tell the atheists, you just didn't pick up the memo. You haven't picked up your memo yet. Michio Kaku, one of the preeminent physicists in the world today, is now entertaining the idea of multiple universes, which suggests he's believing in an invisible world. He's accepting the concept of an invisible world. If you can accept the concept of an invisible world, you can accept the concept of an invisible God just as easily. So I say universal prime force. The universal prime force is actually the force from God that initiates give and take action. But I like to use this term for the atheist community. How about considering this concept? A force in the universe, which Max Planck talked about, the mind, which is the matrix of the universe, a universal, all-encompassing, prime at the base, subatomic force. Star Wars talks about the force. Use the force, Luke. Universal prime force. If you can't debate on any other level, bring it to this. Let's talk science. Let's just strip the whole religious thing away from it. Let's talk about science. And there's too much evidence. There's too much evidence to suggest the existence of an invisible creative force in the universe. So, where are we now? The first human ancestors, we are the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity. Our teaching is based on the Old and New Testament. And we believe that there was 2 human ancestors that began this particular race. They fell from the ideal. And then God began a restoration process, beginning with Moses, the 10 Commandments, Jesus and the Gospels, and then what we call the completed Testament age, New Testament age here with Jesus, completed Testament age, or the New Age. And each one of these periods, interestingly enough, is almost exactly 2,000 years each. So, Jesus came 2,000 years ago. It should not be any surprise whatsoever that some grand new understanding of God's revealed truth would be hitting the earth right about now. If this timeline is correct, and it is, this is simple historical fact. This happened historically. You can document this. Archaeology proves this. We say that God has been working through history, and that's the history of restoration, the divine principle, to bring back the Garden of Eden and the ideal. Second part of our talk is concerning the 3 blessings. Now, Genesis 1:27 talks about the image of God being masculine and feminine. We saw that. Genesis 1:28, the very next verse says, marching orders, what to do. God creates in Genesis 1:27. The very next verse, God says what to do. Very interesting. God bless him and said, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, and every living thing that moves upon the earth. Most people like to run all this together and just say that's just reproduction, the whole thing. Fruitful, multiply, have dominion, that's one thing. It's not. It's separated by commas even in the Bible. There's fruitful, multiply, and have dominion. 3 separate commands. God would not be redundant. God would not be redundant and say the same thing 3 times in the same sentence. It's 3 separate commands. And we're going to talk about that. Again, remember, Jesus said, the time's coming, I'll no longer speak to you in parables and symbols. Things are going to be very, very clear. 3 blessings. What does it mean to be fruitful? If this is the first command out of God's mouth, this must be the most important thing that we need to understand. To be fruitful. This is the first command out of God's mouth to his newly created son and daughter. What does that mean? Well, centered on God, that would mean probably that the mind and the body would be centered on God. God gave them a command, don't eat of the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of good and evil. In the day you eat of it, you will surely die. So God is giving them some directions as well. Be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. But there's one thing you need to do in this process to not do, let's say, and that's to eat the fruit. Whatever that is. That's a whole separate lecture. That's the fall of man lecture. But they have some kind of marching orders, some kind of running orders to gain this fruitfulness, to become perfected. Jesus said, I and the Father are one. How is Jesus and the Father one? Because Jesus centered his mind and his body, centered on God, and became a perfected individual. It's generally accepted that Jesus did not sin. How did he do that? The only way he could have done that was uniting his mind. He didn't sin with his body. He didn't do anything sinful with his body. That means his body followed his mind. The Word made flesh. The Bible says in John 1:14, Jesus was the Word, and the Word was made flesh. Jesus said, he that sees me sees the Father. Very interesting. See, these are little statements that it's easy just to gloss them over and just, okay, yeah, we're Bible studying today. But when you think about it, it's profound. It's really profound. So that perfected individual, be perfect as your heavenly Father in heaven is perfect, Jesus said in Matthew 5:48. Now, why in the world would Jesus say something like that if it wasn't possible? Interesting. So this person, we know one of the overarching characteristics of Jesus throughout the New Testament is his heart of love, his heart of forgiveness towards other people, and always giving, every time, giving out, healing, multiplying food, doing miracles, healing the sick, raising the dead. His heart ached for the people when he's on the road to Golgotha. He's aching. He's like, he said, don't weep for me. Don't weep. This is not the problem for me. The problem is for you. He knows what's going to happen. The Romans are going to come here and they're going to kill you. And he said, you'll cry for the rocks to fall on you. He said, how I would have gathered you like a hen gathers her brood, but you would not. That's a parental heart. That's a parental heart. Right? So this is God's first command, to be fruitful. A tree cannot give fruit until it's, Kathy, what? A tree cannot give fruit until it's, until it grows to maturity, until perfection. There's some fruits that if you eat them prior to them being ripe, they'll kill you. They're poisonous. It's not until they ripen and fall off the tree that they're edible. So, this is what fruitful means. There's 3 commands. This is so important. These are marching orders, running orders for humankind. Be fruitful, grow to perfection. So, how do we do that? The first human ancestors should have grown through these 3 stages in what we call the indirect dominion, where they have a portion of responsibility. God said, don't eat the fruit. He's implying you have a certain portion of responsibility right now. There's something you need to not do. Why? Now we know in hindsight with this new revelation, divine principle, we know that what he's talking about is in this growth period, just like a little kid. Don't put your hand in the electric socket. Don't stick the fork in the electric socket. During a certain time when the kid is growing, he can't just do the things he'd like to do. He'd like to walk off the porch, which is 6 feet down or whatever, or walk in front of a car. He doesn't know any better. So there's a responsibility. The parents, in that case, for a child, the parents have the responsibility. In this case, Adam and Eve have their responsibility to not eat the fruit. Don't eat the fruit. In this time, to grow to perfection, to become fruitful, you have to not eat the fruit. And we describe that in excruciating, painful detail in the fall of man. So, had they done that, they would have entered continued their growth, fulfilled the purpose of creation, and they would have been in the direct dominion of God. Here, they come directly into the orbit of God, into the love of God, and they're actualized as a couple. Then, and only then, comes a second blessing to multiply. Based on the successful completion of the first blessing to be fruitful, only then do you multiply. There's a very strict order here. It's very, very important. The fall of man, actually, you'll see how important it is. So where does free will come in all this? Doesn't God have control? Why didn't God control the fall of man? Why didn't God control Adam and Eve? Because he imbued us with free will. We said the essential nature, the essential engine of the universe is heart. It's love. God, you don't want a robotic child any more than God wants a robotic child. You don't want, your child could come up to you when you come home from work. Father, here is your coffee. Here are your shoes. Oh, what fun. Thanks, kid. Wow, that's really heartfelt, right? But I remember when my son was small, I'd come home from work. I was teaching him phonics at the time. I'd come home from work. We lived upstairs. He'd hear me coming up the stairs. I could hear the pitter-patter of tiny feet a couple of times. And he came to the door with a pencil and a paper and said, "Give me a test, Daddy." He was so excited about phonics. It's like the key, the code, the secret code to break the language, you know. "Give me a test, Daddy." He was so happy. He's like, "Oh, gosh, Daddy's home. He can give me a test." It just warmed my heart. Wow, there's just something so precious about that. He could have come and said, "Father, here's my pen, here's my paper. I am ready for your test." Very different, right? So here we are, fallen mankind. That's us, man. Whether you like it or not, you're not perfect. No matter how cool you think you are, you're not perfect. And man, I am definitely not perfect. Let me tell you about it. You got it in a couple hours? No. God's will meets fallen mankind and our free will. If we fulfill God's will is accomplished. Deuteronomy 28:1 says, "It shall come to pass if you shall hearken diligently to the voice of the Lord thy God, to observe my commandments, blah, 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 I will set you on high above all nations of the earth." It goes on to say, you will be the head and not the tail. Talking to Israel. You fulfill my will, obey the laws of Moses, you'll be the head and not the tail. You'll be blessed beyond measure. You'll have everything you need. However, if it's not fulfilled, boom. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken, then these curses and plagues will come, and it starts describing plague, famine, pestilence, etc., etc., etc. So this shows that God's will is not in concrete. It can't be. If there's an if, but, even God doesn't know which way you're going to go. God knows all the possible choices we might make and is prepared for each and every one. There's 360 degrees this way and this way of things that we can do. I can sit down, I can stand up, I can throw this, I can walk out of the room, I can get a drink, I can... 1,000 different things I can do. And God knows every single possibility and is prepared for each one. But it's not predetermined. God doesn't know your next move. You're a free moral agent. You're a child of God. You're not a slave of God. You're not a robot of God. You're a child of God. And this is a really, really important point. Free will. Free will is everything. Human responsibility in fulfilling the will of God. God does 95%. Actually, God does 99.99%. It's just relative numbers. But God's portion of responsibility, plus our relatively small portion of responsibility, which requires actually 100% of your effort, to make 5% of God's responsibility takes 100% of your effort, just to equal that tiny little fraction. Then God's will of restoration is accomplished. God relies on us, actually. You know, you could say, "Oh, but you got a weak God." No, we don't. I said the essential power of God, the engine of the universe, is the heart of God, not the law of God. It's the heart of God. Supersedes the law. We were talking about Adam and Eve. In the time of growth, the law has to be preeminent. Thou shalt not. Don't eat the fruit. But after that, they come into the orbit of God, the direct dominion of God, the love of God. They're animated by the love of God. Temptation comes. What? What? Eat the what? Get. Adam and Eve would have just kicked Lucifer right. Get out of here. Are you crazy? Look at us, man. We're in love with each other. We're in love with God. In love with our children. Children are in love with us. Everybody's in love with each other. So, 3 blessings. Be fruitful. We have our perfected individual here now. Second blessing is multiply. How does that happen? Very simply. This perfected individual, man and woman, now comes into this position through give and take action. They cannot help but give birth to a perfected child. This is the original ideal of God. Individual, perfection, then multiplying that perfection, centered on the heart of God again. In the center of everything is the nuclear generator of the universe, the heart of God, intellect, emotion, will. That child becomes perfected, and from there, now we have what you could term the nuclear family, the quintessential perfected family, and from that comes family, society, nation, and a perfected mankind. That doesn't mean you never spill your milk. It means you're perfected in the heart of God. Everybody, nothing can penetrate this. There's no evil, there's no sickness, there's no illness, there's no wretchedness that can affect this family now. They've gone through the 3 stages of growth, they've achieved perfection, now they're multiplying that perfection. Logically, the last thing is have dominion. Again, there's 3 separate commands that are so clear and have so much to them. I said you can expand all of this infinitely. 2 days, 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, 40 days. There's so much to know about the divine principle. We're doing flyover today. Trust me on this. So, perfected mankind. Now we have perfected mankind centered on God in relationship to the creation, the kingdom of heaven on earth. Everyone has everything they need. No one is in want. No one's throwing bombs at each other. The word bomb would have never entered the vernacular. What would you need a bomb for? Nobody needs a bomb. All right? Murder, the word murder would have never even entered. No one would have even thought of the word murder or killing. I think even the word death would have never entered the vernacular. Death would be called ascension. It would simply be called ascension. There would be no such thing as death. Death, for us, it sounds brutal. It sounds final and horrible. Ascension. And I think you'd be able to choose the time you want to ascend. I think lifespan, can you imagine? We die so young, actually, because of sin. Because sin has affected our DNA, our cellular structure in a sense. There's things that are passed genetically, illnesses and things that we can't get out of. In a perfected world with no sin whatsoever, I think lifespan, and you can see it, lifespan was 54 years at the turn of the century, and it's up around 75, 76 now. It's on an absolute upward arc, and there's no end in sight. I think it's entirely feasible that people will live to 100 and 200 years easily in the ideal, once sin is worked out of the race over time. So this is very important. This is fundamental. This is the most fundamental slide in all of divine principle, is the 3 blessings. This can't be emphasized enough. This is the purpose of creation. This is why we're here, all right? And this is where we're heading. This, in a sense, like I said, there's a lot more divine principle to go to show how we actually get here. You have to have a Messiah. There has to be a messianic, a mediator between God and man. You can't do this on your own. Nobody's perfect. But there has to be the forgiveness of original sin and the liberation to be able to grow to perfection. And that comes later on in the lectures. So, humankind, this is about the spirit world. We are the center of the spiritual and physical worlds. There's a physical world. We have 5 physical senses: sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell. And we have what are called positive elements: sunlight, air, and warmth. Sunlight and air are free. They're given by nature. Sun just comes up every day. We get vitamin D from it. We get the trees and plants. The entire created world lives from photosynthesis from the sun. And we get air. We don't have to do anything for those two things. They're just freely given. They're freely given. Other things, though, negative elements, we call negative elements, are food, clothing, and shelter. Those are things you have to do something about. You have to go out and get the food. You got to get the shelter. You got to get the clothing. You have to shelter yourself, in a sense, from the elements. And those are things that you have to do. Same way, in the spirit world, you have 5 spiritual senses. Clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairtangence, taste and smell. There's all kinds of, there's stories, there's reams of volumes of books about people who have all of these senses, one or more of these senses anyway. The ability to see the future, there's all kinds of psychics and mediums all over the planet right now that are able to read you and your ancestry. This is becoming more and more and more common. As we get closer to what we call the last days, this is going to become more and more frequent, more and more prevalent. So, in the spirit world, God's love and truth are the equivalent to air and sunlight in the physical world. These are given free as well, but you have to do things to get them. Same things. Same principle applies in the spirit world as in the physical world. Vitality actions. You have to do things. You have to study. You have to fellowship. You have to pray. There's certain things to do to access God's love and warmth, right? And that's the relationship. So, the body returns vitality elements to the spirit. The spirit keeps the physical body alive. That's the harmonic relationship between the spiritual and physical. We're the microcosm and mediator of harmony between the two worlds. Even 1 Corinthians 15:44 says there is a natural body and there is a spiritual body. Paul said this. I can't make this stuff up. Even he verifies this is true. There's a physical body and a spiritual body, an actual spiritual entity that everyone has. Let's see what I have here. Now, this is an interesting thing. One of our members, Nate Winman, showed me this. This is an interesting kind of a side note, a little treat. I'd been in the church several years, and I didn't know really about this. A good question to ask is, why in the world, if God is omnipotent, omnipresent, all-powerful, all-knowing, etc., 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 why did God even bother to create us? Why does God need us? What a mess the world has become, right? Why did God even bother? There's a very good reason why. Here in a visible, substantial world, we have a physical body and a physical mind. Physical body, physical mind, or brain. In visible, substantial world, in the invisible world, we have a spiritual body and spiritual mind. We just talked about that. And the physical body, spiritual body interact, the spiritual mind, the physical mind interact. The reason why God created the physical world is for one reason. We talked about the 4-position foundation and give and take action. Because the only way that God can have eternal give and take action with you, you have to incarnate in a physical body with a spiritual body. And then when that physical body drops away, the spiritual mind continues to have relationship with God. There's a subject and object relationship eternally. If in fact we were just spiritual beings, we were just somehow incarnated spiritually and returned to God spiritually, there's no subject-object relationship. There's no give and take cycle. There's no circuit. There's no circuit of give and take. There's no circuit of love. There has to be a subject. There has to be an object for love to occur. And that's why God even bothered to create the physical world. So again, we're in a very, very special time. And again, this is, like I said, this is flyover. This is really flyover of the divine principle of creation. Jesus said, when the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth, not just some more truth. Jesus promised a time in the future that everything would be revealed, everything would be very clear. I think it's clear to me, just from the little we've talked about today, that it's in a court of law, I think you could win the case that this might be that time that Jesus was talking about. And you have a front row seat to history. These things I've spoken to you in Proverbs, but the time comes And I shall no more speak to you in Proverbs, but I'll show you plainly of the Father. We've seen God explained scientifically and in a very surface way. We can take this very, very deep in unification thought. The existence of God is settled science. Please trust me on that. And that's it. There you have it. Thank you.